Now I know what you're probably thinking. This guy has massive hands. But the truth is I have normal hands. This is one of those mini cans. It's 222 milliliters instead of the standard 355. I tried to find some non-alcoholic beer in this can size, but they don't seem to make it, which is a shame because shooting those cans is probably about the only thing worth doing with them. So we brought out some club soda. The reason I like to use club soda when I'm shooting cans is because it's just carbonated water. It's not going to leave behind a sticky, unhealthy mess that attracts wildlife. We're going to be using this mini pop can to attempt a sub-half minute of angle shot from 440 meters. We're going to do that in order to demonstrate my approach to shooting from the prone position for maximum accuracy. If that distance and this beautiful place seems familiar to you, it's because this is where I took you last time. It's pretty tricky actually to find places where you can do this kind of shooting, and so when you find a place you tend to stick with it. I have a couple places, but this is by far my favorite. So here we are again. I hope you like it because you'll be seeing it again. And you know, like I said, sometimes I joke that the hardest thing about long-range shooting is finding places to do it. There are essentially 4 criteria I look for, which are legality, safety, accessibility, and practicality. And it really is hard to find places that check all 4 of those boxes. Now you might be thinking, hold on a second, safety first, right? No, it's legality first. If you find a place that's perfectly safe to shoot but it isn't legal, don't do it. I mean, it's just not worth it, guys. So, you know, of course, wherever you shoot, it has to be safe, totally safe, but legality always comes first. So, you know, this is one of those places that checks all 4 of those boxes. After legality and safety, you have accessibility. Of course, a place has to be somewhere that you can get to in a reasonable time frame. You know, it can't be a one week hike in and 1 week hike out. It's got to be someplace that a guy like me can go in a day. And the last is practicality. Now, practicality means a few things. One of them is, you know, having a safe backstop that's also practical, meaning that when you miss, you can see where your rounds hit. You can see your misses. If you find, if you're out in the bush and you set up a steel gong, let's say, in front of a slope covered in foliage, if you miss, it's not going to be much good to you because you're not going to have any data. Your spotter is not going to see where your bullet went, and you're not going to be able to make a correction for your next shot. So you really have to have a backstop that's not just safe, but, you know, is either rock or dirt or sand or something where you can see where your bullets are landing if they don't land on your target. Another aspect of practicality is having a suitable place to fire from, a good firing position. If you're shooting from the prone position, and if you're shooting for precision, of course, that's what we're here to talk about today, you're going to be shooting from the prone position, and it has to be flat. Obviously, you know, if you're shooting across a valley, it's fine if your target's on a slope, but if you're trying to lay down, face down on a slope, it's going to be impossible for you to run that rifle. So you need a flat spot. It is hard to find places that check all 4 of those boxes, but, you know, this is one of those places, so I hope you like it because we'll be here again. So, you know, here we are, and we're going to set up this can. And before we set everything up, we're going to find out just how small this soda can is. So let's measure the width of this target in minutes of angle. Since we're going to be shooting it from a distance, we want to know its angular size. Of course, for angular size, we're using minutes of angle, and a minute is 1/60th of 1 degree. If we measure the can, we find it's 2.26 inches in width. To determine its size in minutes of angle at this distance, we're simply going to remember that 1 minute of angle is 1.047 inches per 100 yards. We therefore simply multiply that by 4.81 for 481 yards, and we find that 1 minute of angle at 481 yards is 5.04 inches. Now, if we divide the width of the can by 5.04, we're left with 0.45 minutes of angle. Now that's edge to edge, which is to say that if the bullet strikes either edge of the can, provided at least half the width of the bullet strikes either side, that's a 0.45 MOA shot. The width of this can is 0.45 MOA, and of course when we measure groups at the range on paper, we're measuring center to center. We do that, of course, by measuring edge to edge because it's easier and more precise, and then we subtract the diameter of the bullet to give us center to center. So essentially, if we graze either side of this can, that's a 0.45 MOA shot. But let's face it, that's not going to satisfy either of us, I think. If I just graze this can, great. I've scored a half minute of angle shot, but I'm not really going to be thrilled about that. I want to hit the can, I want to hit it in the meaty part of the can. Generally, anytime I'm shooting a target, you know, out here, we're learning practical shooting out here. That's why we come out here. And generally I want to hit the middle 3/5 of the can. That's my personal standard, or of the steel plate, or whatever it is that I'm shooting. I want to hit the meaty part of it. So, you know, that's very easy to do, of course. If we know that the full width of the can is 0.45 minutes of angle, we simply divide by 5. We get 0.09 for fifths. We multiply that by 3, and we find that the middle 3/5 is 0.27 minutes of angle. So if we want to hit this can in the meaty part, the middle 3/5, that's going to be a 0.27 minute of angle shot. We're really counting on the confluence of multiple factors to pull that off. We're counting on little to no wind. We're counting on me doing my job, pulling the trigger perfectly with good technique. We're counting on the round being in spec and the bullet being seated perfectly true to the neck. All of these things we're hoping for, and I think, you know, I have a good feeling. I do this kind of shooting out here all the time, and the conditions feel perfect. I think we're going to be able to do it. I hope we're going to be able to do it, because I've only got the one can, so bear with me. You know, let's hope for good results. If I graze the can, that'll be a sub-half minute of angle shot, and I'll post that. Obviously, if I miss it altogether, then this never happened, and if you're watching this, then it ends reasonably well. Hopefully that means we've hit the center of the can somewhere and not the edge. So we're really hoping for a sub-half minute of angle shot here, fingers crossed. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the can obviously on the backstop, and I'm also going to set up some flagging tape so I have some information about what's happening down here with wind. That's not something I generally do at these distances. I feel like, you know, with a 308 at under 500 meters, I generally don't worry about wind. To be honest, I don't even measure it where I can, which is where I'm shooting from. Generally, wind matters most where you can't read it. It matters at the target. You know, I have an anemometer and I can measure the wind from my firing position, but I can't measure it down here. And the reason it matters the most at the target when you're shooting long range is because that is where your bullet is slowest. Your ballistic coefficient is lowest where your velocity is lowest. And that's, of course, at the terminal phase of your bullet's flight at the target. So, of course, wind matters along the entire flight path of the bullet. It matters where you're at the firing position. It matters in the space between that and the target. And, of course, it matters at the target. But your bullet is most susceptible to the wind at the target where the velocity is lowest and therefore your ballistic coefficient is lowest. So let's bear all of that in mind. Let's set up some flagging tape because this is a particularly difficult shot. So I want to have all the information I have to have a good crack at it. So we're going to set up this can, we're going to set up some flagging tape, and we'll be right back. All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about the prone position. Generally speaking, this is going to be the most stable and accurate approach to long-range shooting that's available to you in the field. There are tripods and other things that are out there. Generally speaking, they're a lot harder to work with. They're less stable. Sometimes they're necessary if you don't have a flat spot. If you're shooting from a hillside, there's not going to be any alternative to a tripod other than freehand, of course. That's not going to work for you. But ideally, you're going to be able to get, find a firing position where you can get prone. That is by far your most desirable position for long-range shooting. Now, prone position is one of those things, specifically technique for prone position shooting is one of those things where there's a different opinion for every person that does this sport. Everyone has the right way to do it, and their way is always the right way. I really encourage you to experiment and find what works for you. I can give you a little bit of information about what works for me, and this is the result of many years of doing this, but ideally you're going to experiment and you're going to find your best approach to the prone position. There are some guidelines. Here's one that I lean on every time I do this, and that is you want to, generally speaking, you want to introduce as little human input into the rifle as possible. You really want the rifle to not be interfered with. You want to touch the trigger, you want to break the shot as cleanly as possible. You don't want to be muscling the rifle. Now, that having been said, there are advantages to muscling the rifle. I essentially think of the prone position in two ways. I think of it in terms of hard and soft. Soft is what I'm describing now, and that means, again, limiting human interference with the rifle and allowing it to go off as steady as possible. The downside to that is, you know, it's going to kick. This is a 30 caliber rifle, and this is not a particularly large chambering for long range shooting. This is sort of the entry level for shooting long range. So, you know, the disadvantage of limiting human input into the rifle is that it's going to buck, right? And that's generally how I shoot. I let her buck, and that works really well for me. The disadvantage is that I'm not going to be able to see my own trace. I'm not going to see where the bullet goes. I rely on my spotter to tell me, well, you missed, you know, you're low and to the left, and then I'll correct accordingly. I don't have a spotter here. Bear's not particularly good at running the spotting scope and giving me information. So what I have is, or I will have, is a camera up there. And in the event I miss, then I can stop and do an instant replay. And that's a good approach for solo long range shooting. That definitely helps me when I'm out here just having a good time. We're counting on not missing today. That would be really cool if we tag this thing in the meaty part of the can on our first shot, and that is always our objective. You know, I came up here with, you know, a few rounds. I hope to burn off just one of them. So, you know, the advantage of the hard versus the soft approach to shooting, on the other hand, shooting prone, is that you can control recoil and you have a better chance of spotting your trace. It is harder to hit the target in the first place, particularly a very small target like this if you really muscle it. But if you do choose to do that, there are a couple of things that you can do. You can get behind the rifle, and you could, first of all, you could push forward a little bit on the rifle to preload the bipod. That'll anticipate some of that recoil. You want to flex the bipod forward, and that way you're putting a load on that bipod. Another thing is you can put your cheek down onto the comb, almost like you're fixing to fall asleep on it. Now, I did steal that phrase from someone. He insists that he's a very, very skilled shooter. He's very famous for this, and he insists that that's the right approach to your cheek weld on the comb of your rifle. I tried that. It didn't work for me, right? That's one of those opinions that works great for that guy, probably works great for some of his students. I generally, when I'm shooting soft, so to speak, I'm just touching the comb with my cheek. I'm not fixing to fall asleep on it. But if you want to control recoil, that's definitely one thing you want to do. You want to preload that bipod, lean forward, and you want to put your face down on the comb and let it hit you in the cheekbone. It's not going to hurt that much. So those are two things you can do. You're generally going to hold the pistol grip of the rifle if you're shooting hard, so to speak. You're going to hold it hard. You're going to try to control that recoil, and you're going to pull it with your hand into your shoulder with your dominant hand, your shooting hand. Your non-dominant hand, of course, is always going to be holding your bean bag or whatever you're using. And by the way, here's a little mini gear review. I don't know if you can relate to this at all, but sometimes in life, you know, we use things that are not ideal, that don't work particularly well, but we continue to suffer through the experience of using them because they work in one way or another. I've been doing that for years. I've been hauling a 3-pound homemade sandbag up here. It was awful, but it worked. You know, it was like Buckley's. It tasted terrible, but it worked. It was heavy. It was not particularly stiff, so it was very floppy, and it was hard to get a good shape. But as you can see in my last video, I used it then. You know, I can shoot pretty consistently with that old homemade sandbag. Well, I finally ditched it and actually went out and splurged $30 at the local, local tactical store. It's DS Tactical in Westminster. They're located in Metro Vancouver, and they do mail order as well. And I got this terrific little bean bag for $30 plus change, and it's only 1 pound. It's small, and it has a nice shape to it. You can turn it on its side. You can run it either way, and I find that works really well for me, whether I'm shooting hard or soft. But yeah, I mean, if you're shooting hard to control recoil, generally you're going to want to pull that rifle into your shoulder, and you're also going to want to dial the magnification back so you have you're not shooting at max magnification, so you have a larger field of view, gives you a better chance of spotting your trace and finding out where your bullet went. It's a matter of simply recovering from the recoil more quickly, finding the target again, and seeing where that bullet lands. But again, for something like this, we're attempting a 0.27 MOA shot, as you know. So I'm definitely going to be shooting soft, as I would call it, limiting my input into the rifle. Oh, and one more note, whether you shoot hard or soft, one thing that can really help you with controlling recoil and maximizing your chances of spotting your own trace is using a muzzle brake. Of course, you can put a brake on your rifle, and that's going to limit the recoil. Limit the recoil, and there's no shame in doing that, even with a 308 that doesn't kick particularly hard. There are advantages to it. The reason I don't do it is twofold. Number one, I have a dog behind me, and he has hearing protection, but he has no way of telling me whether it's adequate. So I like to err on the side of caution, and muzzle brakes direct a lot more noise rearward, right? It's a lot louder behind the rifle because they're directing gases rearward to the side, really. But it tends to kind of, the sound waves tend to propagate rearward, and and that increases noise appreciably. So I don't do that because I don't want to hurt him. I don't know how effective these mutt muffs are. I think they're pretty effective, but I have no way of knowing, so I like to err on the side of caution. Reason number 2 is training. Nobody likes recoil. It's something we have to put up with. It's it's a part of shooting centerfire rifles. But the advantage to becoming accustomed to recoil and not relying on something like a muzzle brake is that it enables you to shoot larger and larger calibers as you get used to recoil without flinching when you break the shot. Now, again, I don't have a problem shooting an unbraked 308, but I'd like to eventually put together a 300 PRC for extreme long-range shooting, for going out past 1,000 and so on. And I do think I'll flinch if I don't have a brake on that rifle. I'll definitely break that rifle. But this rifle, I don't like to have a muzzle brake on it because it allows me to basically get the full effect of the recoil and become accustomed to it. So that's a training consideration that I've made. But essentially, yeah, a shot like this, 0.27 MOA, I'm going to be shooting quote-unquote soft. I'm going to be, limiting my contact with the rifle. I'm just going to be touching my cheek to the comb. I'm going to be squeezing the bag to raise the butt of the rifle, or letting it settle to come down. And in that fashion, I hope to tag this can and shut up and play guitar already, as they say. So let's switch to the spotting scope now. There's no wind, so the conditions are really, really, really nice now. Let's switch to the spotting scope view and turn these things over and get on with the show. It's so small, I wanted to hold on the right edge for the little bit of a breeze we have, but it's so small I can hardly see it. Anyway, here we go. Well, let's see how we did. All right, guys, hopefully you can see this, get some contrast here with the snow. I'll try to line up the entry and exit holes. And yeah, basically we tagged the can right at the top right here. The full width of the bullet's diameter made it through the can and basically blew the side off like that. And yeah, I looked carefully at it, and there is a bit of a, you can tell there's an entry hole right here, and then it went out the other side. And yeah, I would say it's somewhere between the our objective of 0.27 and the full width of 0.45. So definitely sub half MOA shot. Top right, inside, hard to say. Maybe the right 4/5, something like that. Not 3/5, but not full width either. So yeah, that's my best guess looking at it. I'm not sure if it shows up on the camera, but I would say that's 4/5, which is pretty good. It's definitely still, within that meaty realm. And over here you can see it caught some flack from the rock blast. Those actually look like entry holes if you look carefully at it. So I'm guessing what happened is when the can jumped, it continued getting peppered with rock blast from 308 rounds slamming into the rock at 2.5 times the speed of sound. So there she is. I would say that's a good result. All right, guys, one last piece of advice I'll give you is make sure you're comfortable, make sure you're relaxed. And I find for myself personally, especially for me at about the 800 meter mark, I find if there's any sort of discomfort, like a little pebble that's under my mat pressing into my ribs, and you're tempted to ignore it and just carry on with the task at hand, I highly recommend dealing with it first, because for me I find it almost introduces a sort of subconscious squirminess, and the shots, when you break the shots, they never feel quite as clean as they do when you're really comfortable. So getting comfortable, I think, is an important part of shooting from the prone position, no matter what approach you use. And And whatever works for you, I think being comfortable helps a lot. It helps me a lot, and I think it'll help you a lot too. Well, that's it for today, guys. I thank you so much for joining us. I hope you learned something. I hope you had a good time. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button, maybe even sharing the video with your friends. I appreciate it, Bear appreciates it, and we'll see you again next time.